My name is Bruce Crosley. Today we're going to talk about the first stores that were put together for selling radio equipment. It is the Gernsback Store. If you notice the photograph up on the wall, is his portrait. He was the writer and publisher of a lot of the magazines. If you look at the sign over here that says Gernsback Store, it was the prototype to help people get parts for radios, and many towns had a Gernsback Store or a store like the Gernsback Store. All these magazines were produced so that people could read about what is the latest development in radio, vacuum tubes, and those kinds of things. A typical Gernsback magazine would have an article such as this one. If you wanted to build a radio, it would tell you how to build it, it would tell you how to lay the cabinet out, it would tell you a diagram of the parts that were to be included, and you would take this magazine down to the radio store and say, I want to build this, what parts do I need? Then you would find the person in the radio store would have all these parts, and then they would start putting the parts together for you to build this radio. Most cases, the radio was built on a wooden platform and a front panel. So all the ports were assembled, and the drilling that needed to be done on the panel was always included. So this is the beginning of radio entering the home, about 1926. Now, some of the radios that are included in this store are ones that you could make or ones that were pre-made. Now, a lot of people did not want to make their own. They wanted to buy a pre-made radio. All these radios that have three big dials typically are very similar to each other, such as these. Now, I'm going to explain to you, when you buy a radio, such as this, it would be a TRF, they call it, tune radio frequency. If you notice these knobs, they go from 0 to 100. So there's no station designation or frequency on them. So what would happen is when you bought them in a radio store, the store attendant would say, let me show you how this works. The first thing he would give you is a radio log. It was just to be a listing of the settings of the dials, and you would write down the radio station, its frequency, and the settings for the dials. So he would explain to you how to get to the local stations so you can impress your wife, for example. So he would say, if you want to hear WMBF, you would turn the first dial to 80, the second dial to 70, and the third dial to 50. And then you could hear that radio station come in. Now, the first radios were made so you would have to put earphones on, which I have a pair over here I'll talk about in a few minutes. And then basically, you would put the earphones on and you could hear it. Now, if you had more than one person that wanted to hear the same station at the same time, I'm going to show you a device over here. We're going to get the earphones. Such as I have right here. These are the earphones that you would put on your head and hear the radio stations. Now, if more than one person wanted to hear it, you would take the headphones and you would put them on this adapter. And basically, the headphones would feed into this horn, just a simple horn. This is no different than just having a horn that you speak through. And the radio would be broadcast so everyone in the room could hear the radio station. These are the kinds of things that you will be able to buy at a radio store. Now, one of the simplest forms of radios was called a crystal radio. This is a commercial version of it made by the Federal Company. And this crystal radio, this is the tuner up here. You would touch the crystal, you would touch the what they call a cat whisker to the galena crystal, that's lead crystal. And you would get different stations. Then you would fine tune the radio by these dials here to bring it in sharper. So you would have an antenna, a ground, and earphones. So this is a commercial version. The Mother Oats company came up with an idea to sell more Mother's Oats. They came up with this idea where they would create a Mother's Oats container that had Mother's Oats in it, but inside this Mother's Oats box, there was already a wire placed on here for tuning radios. So basically it's under the paper, and what you would do is you buy this Mother's Oats, and then it showed you the connections. For 25 cents you could send away and get the parts. You could build this radio, so you connect the antenna and ground, earphones here, same thing. You would tune the radio station by checking it out that crystal here.
Lots of guys based there.
So basically that's how you would get it tuned. And this was something, once you bought the Mother's Oats and you got the parts, you had a radio. So that was something that a lot of youngsters would do. And basically this was created so that they could do it individually, or like in a Cub Scout group, or a Boy Scout group, or a Girl Scout group, they could make their own radio. So we were lucky to have one of the original ones. Now, not all Mother's Oats came that way. This is from the same period of time, except there's no wire inside. So if you ever find a Mother's Oats can and you take your finger and you go on the other side and you feel the coil, you've got a treasure. Now, a lot of the radios that you see in here are pre-made by companies. One of the companies was Atwater Kent. Atwater Kent decided to take a board that people were familiar with. This is called a bread board. It was designed for cutting bread. And basically what they did is they took a bread board and mounted these components on it. These are different modules, so you could buy it as a kit. You could buy those parts here at the radio store. You could put it together on a bread board that typical people were familiar with. And this is a 3-tube set. So you had vacuum tubes that you would hook up to batteries, and then you would tune it just like I explained before. As you tune this, and this was done where you only had to have one dial, and then you would determine the brightness or amplification of the tubes by turning these knobs. So this was a big improvement. Now I'm down to one knob. And all the other radios, like these are kit Crosleys, these are Greebies, they're all made, and they were pre-made. This was you could pre-make, or it was a kit. Some of these were made, this is a kit that they bought, and there's a crystal on it. This is Crosley. That looks like a kit. It would come as a kit, but as you can see inside, it has 2 vacuum tubes, and you could make it yourself, or you could buy it pre-made. When they got a little more sophisticated, there was marketing that was put together to kind of attract you to a cabinet because it looked pretty. This one, they made sure the tubes are mounted outside, and they gave this orange color inside the glass. When the radio was operated, when the tubes were lit, it gave off this nice golden glow. There were companies that actually made it in blue. They're called Brights and Blues, so you'd have color. Tubes were outside, and you could see it. This radio was made in plate glass, because this one, then you could see all the tubes lit up. Now, making this was a kit, but drilling holes in glass was not easy. So it was one of those things, not everybody could make it. Now, some of the promotional materials, you have GE dowel, you have an RCA dowel there. They were designed to sell the vacuum tubes. So in a display in a window, you would see those guys holding a tube. Now, many of you probably are not old enough like me to remember who this guy is. Way back when one of the biggest sponsors on radio were cigarettes. This was Chesterfield cigarettes, and his name is Johnny. And Johnny would sing a song, Philip Morris, and That's why we have him here. His name is Johnny. Most people don't know that. So as you start looking at advertising, if you look up at top, we have all kinds of advertising signs that are lit. These would be in store windows, advertising. The big sign that says Majestic over there would be advertising radio tubes like Cunningham, Bendix Radio, and radio servicing became a big business. There was a radio serviceman practically in every community or part of the store. We are fortunate enough to have a recreation of one of the service station for radios. This is a one-tube set that is here for repair. These are the typical parts that you would have, the meters that you would have, the test speaker, reference books, and these were all part of it. And to solder wires together was not electric. It was basically you would take this and your wood stove or coal stove in the kitchen, you would set this on the stove to heat it up, and then you could use it to solder wires. Those are the days before they had the electric soldering irons. Now, as you go through all of this, you can see the business grew bigger and bigger. Radios became more sophisticated. If you look down here, this is one of the most sophisticated. It is a Lutz radio. Lutz Radio was made in Altoona, Pennsylvania, the big railroad town. And this had multi-stages. This is, you had to be a real radio aficionado to play with this thing. Everything was tuned, every stage was tuned, but Lutz Radio was considered one of the best, but it wasn't for the simple people. Now, in our museum, we also have a collection of speakers. If you look up above, these are horn speakers. And typically the first speakers were a horn similar to this one. It's no more than an earphone put on a horn. And then you have the ones that are cone speakers up there. This one in the middle is a cone speaker. It's like having the earpiece behind it, and that big cone would vibrate. But they would give a more mellow tone rather than the metallic sound coming out of a horn. As the business grew, companies like Westinghouse over there, that lit neon sign, Westinghouse was basically an electrical hardware manufacturer, and it got into the radio business, just like all the others did. So as the whole industry developed, this was in from about 1923 up to about the 1930s, you would see stores like this. After, at the beginning of World War II, you didn't see stores like this because of the shortage of parts and things of that sort. So you would see catalogs, like Allied Catalog and things like that came into being. So you would order stuff from like Allied Catalog to build your radio equipment. That'll give you a flavor of everything we have in the store, except one last thing. The one thing that's most important during this period of time is testing tubes. Where do I get a tube testing? Radio shops had tube testers, but one of the other places that you found tubes is in drugstores, 5 and dimes. Other stores like that would have a tube tester like this. You would look up the number of your tube on it. It would tell you the settings. It would tell you the socket. You put the tube in, and then you would press a button, and then the meter would tell you whether it was good or bad. So this is where you got your tubes tested, okay? That'll give you kind of a flavor of what we have in our radio store.